Hi, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. I'm your host, Phil, with Logan and John today. It's episode number 232. On today's podcast, we're going to talk about tool modifications, listener comments, and more. We always appreciate you listening and for your questions, comments, and smart remarks that you send to us either on the YouTube channel or as emails. That would be great. woodsmith@woodsmith.com is the usual place. This episode of the ShopNotes Podcast is sponsored by Harvey Industries, when good enough is not good enough. See all our new tools at harveywoodworking.com. All right, let's check in with last week's comments. Kevin Thomas says, having fun watching the dogs being annoyed by the cat.
Yeah.
Who isn't, really? Congrats, Phil and Logan from Terrell. Well, hey, Terrell.
No mention of me, though.
Nope. No
Wow.
mention of you.
Terrell, we got beef.
Puppy Doc Bob says, upcoming episode of the Woodsmith Shop TV show presenting home office related projects.
Seriously,
seems like
Bob?
Seems like an opportunity for someone to maybe earn points with the spouse. I won't say who, but we all know. But then I have nothing to say because I've been working on my workbench for 2 years and making little progress. But he ordered the Lee Valley tail vise right after last week's podcast, and it arrived today, so he has inspiration to get back to it.
You know, if we haven't,
He's been this.
I was going to say, if we hadn't already met Puppy Doc / Bob, I would think that's your wife's burner account. Like,
Yes. I was going to say that I think Bob's just been too busy playing with the sawmill.
Oh, there you go.
You know, if
Could
he'd
be.
spend less time milling logs, maybe he could get something done in his shop. Speaking from experience.
Ian McCullough says, if Logan has a shop mansion, does he also employ a shop butler to keep the place in order and provide him with drinks as required?
I think that my shop is less of a shop mansion. It is more of a modest, low cost of living state house. No butler
Okay.
here. A shop cat, but that's it.
Yeah. It does a terrible job of bringing beverages.
Yeah.
Daniel Else says, in response to our discussion of your tool haul and the fact that you just dumped a bunch of tools in the trash, that we could dump good tools at the local Habitat for Humanity restore, which is fair. However, the tools that you were putting in the garbage / recycling were not worth more than the scrap that they were there. I wouldn't say
Correct.
I don't say those were good tools.
The wrenches were half decent, but at some point, the Habitat for Humanity Restore is going to throw them away just as well as I am.
I would agree.
Because I don't think somebody's going to go in and buy those.
Yeah.
I like to think that somebody's going to dig those out of the garbage and bundle them with some half-decent, rusty tools in an old toolbox and sell them to you again on the side of the road somewhere. It's just the circle.
you're not
It would-
wrong.
Yeah, it would be full circle.
Yeah.
And I did take, we had a clean out day. I don't know, what was that, like 2 months ago?
Yeah.
We had just kind of collected stuff that's been sitting around here and we've gathered over the years and stuff. And we created a free table for employees and folk at the company to take what they wanted. And people did, but there was still a good amount of stuff left. So I took a bunch of that over to the restore because those were modern tools in good shape, still with plenty of useful life left in them. It wasn't like your drawer of to be sharpened drill bits that needs to, either get recycled or resharpened or whatever. So
I always thought it'd be an interesting experiment to have like a parking lot garage sale during the summer, because it seems like we collect a lot of shorts, lumber, pieces of veneer, like stuff that's useful to most woodworkers, but just piles up here. Just have some sort of parking lot
right.
swap meet or giveaway, or I don't know what we do, but it'd be interesting. Have a get together. So
I could see that. That would be kind of fun to have just show up, check it out, help us clear out lumber racks and stuff like that.
Sounds
because we
like
get the same
perfect thing to happen in October.
Yeah,
right.
Maybe.
Because we also get the same thing with hardware, where we're choosing hardware for a project, and sometimes you get a set of hardware in, and it's like, nope, those handles are too big. And some stuff we can return, and sometimes it's not easy to return, and so we'll just get extras.
Or we need 6 of something, and it only comes in boxes of 100, or and then it just piles up.
Which is often the case with stuff that you get from McMaster Carr, because you could buy one, but it's, $15 with $45 of shipping, or you buy a bag of 50 and it's $60 and $0 shipping.
Yeah.
So, yeah. We'll maybe put that on the calendar. I would be interested to know how many listeners, viewers of the podcast would make a trip or are local to Des Moines, local enough for Des Moines to make that worthwhile. So put your vote in on the comments, send an email. That would be kind of cool to find out.
Yeah, because we're trying to get rid of projects at times too. I mean, not that we'd hold on to every project throughout the year, but if we had some to get rid of during that time, that'd be fun to put them into the hands of readers or listeners and move them along.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Or half-finished projects from the TV show that somebody wants to finish.
Bunch of stunt parts that could be turned into a project at some point. Yeah.
Yep.
The as-is sale at Woodsmith.
That's right.
Do we really want people to be looking in our closet, though?
That's true.
Like
it takes from the magic.
It does.
Look behind the scenes. These guys really don't sand.
I don't think we've ever claimed any different.
Yeah. We don't even scrape off all or sand away the dried glue before we start finishing.
Yeah.
Learn that the hard way.
I don't generally leave dried glue for the next guy.
It's just a little rookie hazing.
Yeah. All right, let's see. Were there other comments? Nope, that looks like that was it on that one. Let me check the previous episode, because we had some technical difficulties and had 2 episodes go out last week.
Oh, God. We did that to the people?
Yep.
You know what? It kind of serves them right, so.
Yeah. We probably have half the people listening to this one because so many people unsubscribed after getting so much of Logan in 1 week. Not Jim, though. He's already gone.
Nope, Jim was gone. He was gone.
Never forget. Never forgive.
Yep. And Howcap says, he was quoting, "I was told I wasn't going to be fact-checked. And thanks for the spit take, John." IJWT Botdad says, "Jim's comment made me crack up. The ridiculousness is why I'm here." There you go. And that's it for new comments on that one. So, yeah, it's nice because Jim is going to give us, plenty of material for a little while here till that settles out. All right. One of the things that I was thinking about was that marking gauge that I got from that tool haul you picked up, Logan. It's got a mortise gauge on one side, like I was saying. There's some chipped out sections on the beam of the mortise gauge, so I'm working on cleaning that up. And I have it in the finish room right now because I kind of rubbed it down with some turpentine and steel wool just to clean off the gunk. And pulled out the pin that was used for the marking gauge part of it and was trying to decide if I actually replace it with something or just leave it as a mortise gauge. And I'm still sort of undecided. And then if I do put a new pin in there, what do I do? Because I'm just not normally a fan of pins because of you can't really use it cross grain then. It turns into just turns into a scratcher. Yeah. So there's that. And then that kind of brought up the fact that, I'm replacing some chipped out sections of wood with some fresh meat on there. So like, what's your level of tool modification on something like that?
I don't generally modify tools like that very much. I kind of leave them as is. To me, like that marking gauge, I have other marking gauges. I wouldn't mess with that. That's why it's like, here you go, Phil.
Right.
What the most I would do if it's something like that is I'd tear it apart for pieces.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So it's like if it was like a rosewood one, I would tear it apart because I then use like not the stem, but the bigger part of it. I've used those to repair like totes on hand planes or knobs on hand planes because it's a hunk of old rosewood that matches Stanley rosewood pretty well.
Right.
So like that type of stuff, I don't usually modify. The closest I get is modifying something like a chisel to do a certain task, like an old chisel, turn them into a scraper blade or something like that, a scraper chisel, or like these 3 hand saws that came in this tool purchase. 2 of them had pretty kinked totes on, or pretty kinked plates, enough that I'm not like, I don't want to mess with them, so I will slice those apart into scrapers.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. There was I believe it was a user modification already on there in the sense that the adjustable pin for the mortise gauge section had on the opposite end of it a tapped hole and a brass screw in there to essentially fix it at a given width. Mm-hmm. So I'm guessing that whoever had that drilled and tapped that hole, put that screw in to match their mortising chisel or drill bit or whatever they used on it.
Yeah. I didn't ever look at that. Was there a name on that at all?
There isn't. There's a patent number on there, patent number and date.
Okay.
And I don't have it. I'd have to step out and grab it.
Okay.
So anyway, I just was thinking about that. Like, how far would you go? Because it's a continuum, I would think, because with a hand saw or a hand plane, you could repair totes and knobs or replace them, and then goes all the way up to through power tools. And part of what made me think of it, Logan, is you were looking at a Northfield bandsaw.
I didn't think we were airing all this dirty laundry.
This is a safe place.
That would, yeah, that would need some help on it. So, for example, that Northfield bandsaw, old bandsaw, probably needs some paint. But one thing that it was missing was a rip fence, like a stock rip fence.
Yep, doesn't seem to have a rip fence on it. Yeah, so I guess at that level, I feel like there's part of me that just always wants to return it back to how it came, how it was intended to be. So in that instance, if I would decide to pick up this Northfield, I would reach out to Northfield and try to get a fence for it. Instead of, we talked about it, like there are aftermarket fences, like I think Craig makes one, Carter makes one, maybe not for a saw that size, but there are fences available. Yeah. However, the part of me that really likes the vintage stuff, I want it back how it came from the factory. Yeah. Because having, been around machines my entire life, I know that there's reasons things are certain ways generally. So that's kind of how I would want to return it. So yeah, like we talked about, you could probably rig up like a Biesmeyer style fence on it. Get an old table saw fence, cut it to length, and there you go. But I would probably reach out to them.
Yeah. I mean, you say that, but then you are also in the process of getting a spiral insert cutter head for a Moac jointer.
Yes. Yes, I am. There are, certain advancements were a benefit. So back in the 40s, there were not helical cutter heads with carbide tipped inserts. So yes, there are certain advancements that are better. Also, why I have carbide tipped blades in my big crescent bandsaw. Because they are just better. So, there were certain advancements. Also, why I'm not, like, pulling off the refurbished guards and stuff like that that's on the crescent, because I like my fingers. So yeah, I guess at some point, to some level, I want it back how it came from the factory, with the caveat that there are certain advancements that have happened that may necessitate an upgrade. Another one is like bearings. Most of these machines came with oiled bearings that rode in an oil bath, and there is a large portion of the vintage tool community that says those run smoother than a modern bearing that is sealed. Because the bearings kind of wear in, and they are quieter. And I agree with that. However, the flip side of that is if you keep oilers, it's kind of cool. Kind of like, oh yeah, look, it takes motor oil. You got to shove motor oil in it. Like, it's kind of cool. However, then you have like felt wipers and like all this stuff and dust guards and all this other crap that you got to deal with. So, that is, again, a modern advancement, shielded bearings, that I will take the trade out on. With that said, if it has Babbitt bearings, I'm keeping the Babbitt bearings because they're not Babbitt bearings going to roller bearings, it's a complete overhaul. You're changing a lot of things. I can flip out oiled bearings for shielded bearings without anybody knowing the difference. I can even keep the oilers in place. So,
yeah, like I said, it's a continuum, and
it is. Yeah. Now, I mean, there are certain levels where, and trust me, I tried to go down this route. If it's a vintage tool that had like nickel plating on it and the nickel plating shot, I've tried to figure out how to nickel plate in the shop, and you can do it. And I've turned a couple pennies to nickel plated pennies and stuff. Like you can do it. It just doesn't look the same. So, like that router plane that was in this toolbox, like it's probably going to get painted black. Because the nickel plating's pretty shot on it. So, like, there are modifications like that where it's like, okay, the amount of effort I'm putting into it or the amount of money I'm putting into it is significantly less to change it away from how it came. So,
yeah. Did you just low-key admit to counterfeiting? Trying to turn pennies into nickels? Wow. Secret Service is going to be all over this.
Yeah. I don't know if it's counterfeiting so much as like currency alchemy.
Mm-hmm. Currency fraud.
Yeah. And this episode of the Shop Notes Podcast is sponsored by Grizzly Industrial, purveyors of fine woodworking machinery since 1983. Buy direct and save at grizzly.com. I remember, what was it, high school chemistry class where you could we like soaked pennies in like lye or something like that, and then you hit them with a torch and then they turned like a gold color. Did you ever do that?
We did not. That was too close to making meth to where John and I grew up.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not.
You don't meth with Iowa.
Yeah.
So.
Oh man. But no, here is that level that we were talking about. It has the sights on it. Oh, the camera's not focusing. So like you would look through this one and then look through the little wire one up there. So kind of cool on this little spinny stand. The stand appears to have been nickel plated at one point. It still has nickel on it. It's just not super clean. But what I just realized is this is kind of cool. This is a cover that rotates to cover the glass in the level. So if you were traveling with it, you could cover it up. So now all the glass, because they're actually glass, and they would break, they're now covered, which is kind of cool. So, yeah.
I can just imagine
that's cool.
Mounting a candle and some lenses on that to make a makeshift laser back in the day.
That's right.
I think that's how that works.
Yeah,
that would be sweet.
All right, John, have you ever restored tools or fixed up anything that?
I've restored some hand planes here and there, but when you talk about modified hand tools, what comes to mind for me is I have a modified keyhole saw where there's a notch in the blade of it. And how you create one of these is you take it and plunge it into like the drywall of your wall and start sawing until you see a flash, an arc of light, and then all the lights go off. And then that'll create that little notch in the blade. I don't know what to use it for right now, but that's a tool modification that I have. And I still have that saw. So, the front half of the blade still works. So you're like, making little cuts. And so, but that's one tool I've modified.
Okay. All right. I can see that.
But,
that would be. So keeping that saw is kind of like keeping the cartridge from a saw stop after you trigger it. Huh?
It's like one of your 9 lives.
There is the one tool I do modify fairly regularly, and anybody that turns does this is turning tools. Like you'll buy tools with a certain grind on them, but then you'll change the grind to do what you need. I'm using the modify in a very loose term. I'm just sharpening them differently for different tasks.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty common one. Yesterday on that lamp for the TV show, I used a modified spindle gouge to do a couple of the beads. I've ground it into a beading tool. And that works pretty well. So that's that type of thing where it's like, okay, I guess, you could call that a modification.
Yeah. And I would call that a modification because it's it's not quite the same as, a regular woodworking chisel that you're just going from 25 degrees to 35 degrees on the bevel angle.
Yeah.
You're actually reshaping it into
Yeah.
something that's fundamentally different. I would see the same thing to make the comparison between turning tools and other woodworking tools, where you would make a new handle for a chisel into something that you would like, and I think turning tools, that turners have forms and styles of handle that they like better than what would come stock necessarily.
Yeah.
Because I also think of I got a chisel from you that had, I think it was a firmer chisel, 1/2 inch wide, that I turned from a single bevel chisel into a double bevel for carving. Would be another modification on it. So, and sometimes the modification is something super simple, like taking a palm router and making an extra large base plate for it to replace the stock tiny base plate that goes with it.
Yeah.
Or 3D printing dust ports for tools that had terrible dust collection to begin with. So anyway, that was just, like I said, it was just one of those things where one little thing stands in for a much larger universe of tool hacking, so to speak. Now, you mentioned the project you were working on for the TV show on our home office projects, and you did a lamp design. I think you originally were going to pick one that had appeared in an old American woodworker.
Yeah. There was one from Alan Lacer, who's a turner up in the Twin Cities, and he had done a lamp out of ash that was a glued up lamp. So it was glued up out of 4 pieces, 2 outsides, and then kind of the deli meat in the center, but with a groove in it for the cord. And it was kind of a bigger, chunkier form. And I was looking at it, I'm like, all right, I mean, kind of cool. We already have the plan obviously done for it. But then I started thinking, okay, what can I do that's a little different than that? Because I wanted to put it somewhere in my house and I didn't care for that shape. And I started looking and I found a link on one of the AAW, which is the American Association of Woodturners, forums. Somebody was linking a book from the 1930s, I think. And it is on the archive.org, which is, I think, a Library of Congress type thing. So it was a digital copy of this book, and it was almost 400 pages of wood turning patterns. So flipping through the pages of this thing, there was patterns for everything from shaving stands to picture frames to candle stands to lamps, smoking stands. Like there was turned umbrella holders, like things like that, which I thought was really cool. So I started looking at the lamp designs, and I didn't care for any of those, but one of the candle stands really kind of appealed to me, and it was a much smaller scale, so I just doubled it up. I enlarged it by 200%, and that's what we did. So I turned it out of 3 pieces of ash, one for the base, one for the pedestal, and one kind of for the topper. Hindsight, probably could have done it out of 2 pieces, but breaking it up into 3 worked pretty well. And you get a little bit less vibration with the shorter pieces. And I think it turned out pretty well. Yeah, the shape was a little thinner than I was going for, but trying to get some good clean cuts on that curly ash was, the driving factor of it. So, yeah, worked out pretty well.
Yeah, what I liked about it was the original pattern that you had from Alan Lacer. He did some kind of an ebonized sort of finish on it. Maybe
ebonized in like a lime wash or something.
Right. But most of the time when you see, at least the stuff that I've been familiar with, I would not have thought ash for a project like that. Just because it's an open-grained hardwood, which a lot of times you see a closed-grain hardwood that can get polished up to something super shiny.
Yep.
Fully knowing that ash gets turned into baseball bats, but that's a totally different purpose. But when you got that one done, like I thought it had a nice shine to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it is open grain still, but it's pretty smooth.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was, I think the pedestal on that one got a little thinner than I wanted because I've been doing these shaker side tables. I've turned 4 of the pedestals now, and it has that swooping neck down. And I just am in, like, that's the mode I was in, so that's what I did. And I was like, oh, that was actually supposed to be a little chunkier. But it turned out really well. I didn't realize there's some intricacies of choosing lampshades, I guess.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, design and proportion is a big thing in not only the woodworking world, but turning in any design. Proportion is a big thing. So there is a very particular size that people say a lampshade should be for the base. So I blindly was like, well, I'm doubling up this size. So here's the rule of thumb size that this lampshade should be. And I ordered one. And it's a little large. I don't think it's awful, but it's a little bigger than I think it needs to be. I think it should be maybe a hair smaller. But it turned out pretty well. I did come to realize how big a difference quality hardware is. And it's funny, this morning I was looking at handles for these church doors with one of the guys from the church, and kind of same thing. Church or door hardware is very expensive. But I had ordered the lamp hardware off of a website, and I wouldn't say it was terribly expensive. I mean, hindsight, I think the entire set for the lamp, the bulb holder, the cord, a plug, and the what they call the harp, the part that holds the lampshade. I want to say it was maybe like $17 or $18 per lamp. I ordered a few sets because I didn't know what color was going to be the best. And then it didn't arrive in time, so I ran to Menards and bought a set from Menards for $25 for the set, and it is significantly different in quality. Like the Menards stuff feels like plastic. I mean, it might be. So yeah, I guess the lesson is, if you have the time, you know what you need, order it from a dedicated hardware supplier for whatever that project is, because I think you'll get a much better product at a similar cost to going to a big box store.
Right.
So
that's true. I'll put a photo up on the show notes page of the lamp because I think it did turn out pretty cool. I like you got a straight-sided drum shade for it, which I think complements the shape of it, and it turns out really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, Chris is working right now on a pencil box that we did in the magazine. It was a design that Dylan had come up with based on a vintage one. And I remember seeing one in American Woodworker from years ago, so you slide open the lid and then you can pivot open the pencil box. So there's a lower tray and an upper tray, and then a little section for like an eraser or a pencil sharpener. So Chris is working on one in pin oak, I think is what we discovered, right?
Yeah, that's what I think it is. Walking by it, I'm like, that sure looks like the pin oak we used for the tabletop on that farmhouse table. Or harvest table, whatever it was called.
Yeah. So anyway, and then I'm working on a desk. I'll be doing a desk set, which is a little Post-it note pad holder, and then a small canister for holding pencils and other kind of gear that would be great for on a desktop.
Just
like that.
Mine, yeah.
Yeah.
This is some of that same ash.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Although mine might find its way into my workshop just for holding compasses and pencils and little X-Acto knives and things like that. So
yeah,
cool. It'll be pretty cool. And I get to use up some old Doug fir that I had gotten from Brian Nelson years and years ago. And he had two pieces they were 2x4 that were fir and had super tight grain on it. So he ended up holding on to those, not for whatever construction project he had purchased them for, but used them for small boxes. And the desk set isn't small in scale, so the really fine grain on there works pretty well. So I'm excited about that.
You may not know this, but is that the same fir that he did that little fold-out toolbox that I ended up with?
Yes.
From you, I think.
Yeah. I believe that is that same fir. Yeah.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
Because I think, like most of us, we think fir. We're like, oh, like you might find an okay piece at like a big box store, but like this is nice. Like,
yeah,
I'd poach that tree out of a national forest for sure.
Wow. If the Secret Service weren't on you already,
yeah,
now you get the National Park Service.
Yeah.
Hey, they're defunded. There's nobody to come after me, right?
That's right. It's the wild, wild west out here.
Yeah. So I actually have a section of that 2x4. I'll put a photo of that with some of the pieces that I was working on. So I was creating the blanks and parts that I needed for that last night in my shop. And I think I had gotten some of that fir too in bigger pieces from him that I used on vise hardware from my old workbench. And I kept the jaws of those vices just because it was nice fir. So I ended up starting to slice and dice pieces off of that for that. For
real.
For real.
For sure.
So anyway, I'm excited about it, and it's a fun little project to use up pieces, and fits very well in my vegan woodworking mode that I've been in. So
yeah, I've been having to slice up pieces of this mahogany to avoid these stupid wormholes. These things are haunting me. Like, I can't get away from them. I'm trying to do the panel. I was actually working on the panels before we started podcasting, and I'm like, I can't get away from these stupid wormholes. I'm having to glue everything up, which is fine. Like, gluing up stuff's fine unless you're gluing up plywood. And
whoa,
yeah, but it's just like, man, like this is not what I don't want like a glue line in the. Thankfully, most of this mahogany is kind of like quarter sawn, so it's pretty straight grain. The glue lines pretty much disappear, but it's like, man. Like, I cannot get away from these stupid wormholes. So, and now it's like, I'm afraid that when I start routing there's like an OG profile in these panels. I'm afraid that when I start routing the OG profile in these panels, that all of a sudden I'm going to uncover wormholes. So, I don't know what happens if that happens, I don't know what to do about that. It's like, do I epoxy them? Do I just try to plug? I don't want to try to plug them. It's going to look like a plugged hole then.
Yeah.
It's like, do I just glue up a new one? Probably what I'll do.
Come up with some sort of a filler that you could use.
Yeah, I mean, half the holes are already filled with like a pack of sawdust. Like,
right.
I don't know if it came from the mill that way or if that is a universally accepted mahogany blemish if it is packed with sawwood, or sawdust. I don't know. So we'll figure that out. I hope by the time we podcast next week that I have these stupid things glued up and stain on them.
Okay.
So
that'd be fun to see the progress there.
Yeah.
Now, this is a question that I know John is asking himself right now, is if a group of sawdust is actually called a pack of sawdust, or if there's another name. I don't know. Maybe. Just like a group of bears is called a disappointment.
Did not know that.
Packer fans will know.
Oh no. All right, we have to fill 2 more minutes so sound section can finish up.
Yep.
Or do we become bears and disappoint him?
Oh.
Yeah, could be that too. So anyway, would love to hear your questions, comments, and smart remarks for the Shop Notes podcast. You can put those in on our YouTube channel. Remember, we're switching the podcast on YouTube over to its own YouTube channel called the Shop Notes Podcast. So please go there, check it out, subscribe, like, ring the bell, all that stuff so that you know when a new episode drops. Otherwise, for the rest of you who are the audio only listeners, you probably have the better deal because you didn't have to watch this and listen at the same time. So once again, it's the subscribers to Popular Woodworking, Woodsmith, and Shop Notes that make the podcast possible, especially on a weekly basis. Unlike some of them other woodworking magazines that only do a podcast every other week, here at the Shop Notes Podcast, we're every week. Special thanks to our sponsors for this episode. This episode is brought to you by Grizzly Industrial, purveyor of fine woodworking machinery since 1983. Buy direct and save at grizzly.com. Was that marking gauge that I got from that tool haul you picked up, Logan, it's got a mortise gauge on one side, like I was saying. And a marking gauge on the other side. Sound effects by Logan Whitmer.